The port warehouse on the outskirts of town smelled of oil, salt, and cheap tobacco. Jack Miller, a former soldier and now an illegal arms dealer, stood by the truck, examining his goods. Boxes of AKs, a few rifles, boxes of ammunition, even a couple of old man pads. "The goods are clean, as agreed," he said, inhaling the cold air. His customers, two talkative mercenaries from Central America, glanced nervously at their watches. "Hey, Miller, have you seen the news? They say there's some kind of madness in the city. People are biting each other right on the streets." Jack waved it off. He had heard worse rumors about the Black Plague in Africa and demons in the desert. It all ended with someone profiting from fear. They had almost completed the deal when a rumbling sound came from deep inside the warehouse. Someone was walking with a heavy, uneven gait. Jack frowned and picked up his Glock. A porter with bloodied hands and an empty gaze emerged from the darkness. One of the mercenaries shouted, but the man lunged at him with such force that they both fell, and in the next second, a terrible crunch echoed through the air. Jack didn't know yet that this was only the beginning of a night that would change everything. Jack didn't hesitate. The Glock fired 3 times, and the porter fell to the concrete, but not like a wounded man falls. He continued to writhe, trying to get up again, even with a hole in his forehead. "What the hell?" Jack muttered, stepping back. The second mercenary, pale as chalk, grabbed his machine gun and opened fire, blowing half of the attacker's skull apart. The attacker finally froze. The screams from the street grew louder. Somewhere nearby, shop windows were being smashed, alarms were wailing, and something that sounded like hundreds of chaotic, frenzied voices. "We have to get out of here," Jack shouted. He slammed the truck door shut, throwing a backpack with his most valuable possessions, cash, gold coins, and documents on fake people, into the cab. The mercenaries were also rushing around, trying to grab their goods. But at that moment the warehouse gates broke open and a crowd staggered into the room, dirty, with bloodied mouths, tearing the skin off their hands on the doors. Jack hit the gas before the door closed, and the truck roared out onto the dark waterfront. But after 100 meters, he realized that the city had turned into a trap. The streets of New Orleans resembled scenes from cheap horror movies. Only now Jack saw everything with his own eyes and smelled the nauseating stench. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the road, some with their doors still open, radios continuing to hiss quietly. A gas station was burning in the distance, and black smoke was spreading over the neighborhoods. Jack tried to make his way to his warehouse in the industrial zone, but the further he drove, the more he realized that the center was cut off. The same creatures that had once been human were crawling out of every alleyway. They moved toward the sound of the engine, clanking against the metal, sometimes bumping into each other. "Don't look them in the eyes," muttered one of the mercenaries, catching his breath and keeping his machine gun at the ready. The truck turned sharply onto a narrow street, but there, under the bridge, a barricaded bus was already waiting. The people inside were shouting something, waving their arms, but Jack knew that if he stopped, the crowd behind him would catch up with everyone. He gripped the steering wheel and stepped on the gas, driving around the bus on the sidewalk and knocking down a billboard. Somewhere ahead was the only way out, an old railroad crossing. If it was blocked, they were doomed. When the gates of the industrial zone finally appeared ahead, Jack felt himself breathing for the first time in the last half hour. The truck bounced over the potholes, and without braking, he flew into the courtyard of his warehouse. The 2 guards who had stayed behind were scared to death. One was holding a shotgun and looking around nervously, while the other was smoking nervously, trying to pretend that everything was under control. "What the hell is going on here, boss?" asked the guard. "Business is over," Jack replied, jumping out of the cab. "Now we're fighting for survival." Inside the warehouse, It smelled of oil and metal. Automatic weapons, rifles, boxes of ammunition, and grenades lay on the shelves. Jack immediately began giving orders: barricade the gates, load some of the weapons into the van, prepare Molotov cocktails. Suddenly, there was a dull thud outside. Then another, louder one. Someone, or something, began banging on the gate. One of the mercenaries raised his rifle, but Jack gestured for him to stop. He approached the small observation window and saw dozens of distorted faces pressed against the metal. "They've already found us," he said quietly, "and we don't have much time." The metal gate shook with every blow. Hands, stripped to the bone, reached through the cracks, nails breaking and leaving bloody marks on the iron. "Damn, there are hundreds of them," shouted one of the guards, closing the window. Jack didn't waste time panicking. "Everyone to their positions. Hold out as long as we can, then run to the van." The first breach occurred a minute later. One of the gate hinges was torn out along with the metal. Sensing weakness, the zombies redoubled their attack. "Fire!" Jack thundered. The warehouse filled with the roar of automatic gunfire and grenade explosions. Bullets tore flesh, explosions threw bodies back, but the crowd did not diminish. For every one killed, two more came. One of the mercenaries stumbled, and three of them pounced on him at once. The screams did not last long. Jack saw teeth tearing through flesh and realized they had to leave immediately. "Get in the van. Now," he shouted, throwing lit bottles on the floor near the entrance. The fire quickly spread to the gate, blocking the zombies' path. While they were fighting in the flames, Jack and the two survivors rushed to the back door. They ran out into a narrow alley, and behind them they could already hear the burning gate crashing down. "This is just the beginning," Jack exhaled, starting the van's engine. The van sped through narrow streets, dodging abandoned cars and overturned trash cans. Zombies wandered between houses, but there were no crowds like there had been at the warehouse. Jack took out his walkie-talkie. "Marco, I'm on my way. Get the money and the car ready. If your driver is still alive." There was a short pause on the other end, then a calm voice. "I didn't keep a basement full of gold to be eaten. Come on over." They met near the old industrial zone. Marco was standing next to a black SUV, short, wearing an expensive coat, with a revolver in his hand. His bodyguard was looking around nervously. "You're late," Marco said. "You'll pay for that," Jack replied, throwing a heavy bag of weapons at his feet. They opened the bag, and even the bodyguard whistled when he saw the contents: automatic rifles, pistols, boxes of ammunition. "Where's mine?" Jack asked. Marco nodded, and the guard brought over a briefcase. Inside were stacks of dollars and gold bars. But the moment was ruined by a rapidly approaching shadow. A crowd of zombies slowly emerged from around the corner, and behind them could be heard the growling and stomping of dozens of feet. "The exchange is complete," Jack said, grabbing the briefcase. "Time to go." They didn't even shake hands. Everyone jumped into their cars, and a frantic chase through the industrial zone began. Jack stepped on the gas. The van roared and sped out of the narrow street. In the rearview mirror, he could see Marco's black SUV trying to keep up. Behind them was a wave of zombies running, crashing into walls and cars like a raging river. "Damn, they're not falling behind," he muttered, shifting gears and turning sharply onto the bypass. Suddenly, ahead on the bridge, another threat appeared. A group of people with machine guns who blocked the road with barricades made of trucks. They weren't soldiers, but bandits who quickly realized that the apocalypse was the perfect time to seize other people's property. One of them waved his weapon. "Turn off the engine. Otherwise we'll shoot." Jack didn't slow down. He could see that the bandits had no idea what trouble was chasing him. "Guys, you'd better run," he shouted through the open window, then hit the gas. Behind the bend, the first zombie appeared, followed by dozens, then hundreds. Seeing this wave, The bandits scattered, abandoning their barricades. Jack and Marco sped through the improvised ambush while the zombies began to tear apart those who had not managed to escape. "So tell me, Marco," Jack smiled into the radio, "are you going to pay me extra for this show?" Marco didn't answer. He was looking in the mirror, where death was catching up with them at breakneck speed. The van and SUV crashed into a narrow industrial passageway, where concrete walls rose on both sides, creating a deadly trap if the zombies caught up with them. "There's a dead end to the left behind the warehouse, but there's a gate there," Marco shouted into the radio. Jack turned sharply, the metal wheels skidding on the gravel. In front of them was a massive gate, chained and locked. Zombies were already rushing into the alley behind them. "Hurry up, I'll cover you." Jack jumped out of the van, AK in hand. Marco wasted no time, grabbing a bolt cutter from the trunk. The first shots blew the heads off several of the nearest corpses, but the onslaught continued unabated. The dull thud of hundreds of feet echoed off the walls like a drum roll before an execution. "Hurry up," Jack barked, reloading. Shell casings littered the concrete. "Ready." Marco threw back the chain and pushed the gate open. They crashed into the warehouse courtyard, quickly closing the passage. But the silence lasted only a few seconds before another sound came from the darkness. Heavy breathing and footsteps that did not sound human. Several figures emerged from the depths of the warehouse. These were not the slow, dead creatures that had chased them from the street. These moved faster, their hands were scratched with metal, and their eyes were like black holes. "Well," Jack raised his machine gun. "Looks like we picked the wrong yard." The gate behind them slammed shut again, but now it didn't matter. They were inside with a new threat. The warehouse was dark, smelling of rust, oil, and rot. The flashlight on Jack's machine gun cut through the darkness, revealing the silhouettes of fast-moving infected creatures moving with silent coordination. "They're not stupid," whispered Marco, raising his shotgun. The first creature lunged from the left. Jack fired 3 shots. The first missed, the second hit the shoulder, and the third blew off the head. But 2 more appeared behind it, running almost side by side, forcing them to retreat to the rack of metal barrels. "Hold the right flank." Marco fired his shotgun and reloaded. "What's your plan?" "The plan is simple. Survive." Jack fired a burst, forcing several attackers to fall. The rumbling behind the gate grew louder as a mass of slow zombies from the street joined the fast ones. The chain wouldn't hold for long. They made their way deep into the warehouse and found a service staircase leading upstairs. On the second floor were office rooms with broken windows through which they could jump onto the roof of the neighboring building. "I'll go first, you follow me." Jack jumped over, landing on the gravel roof. Marco jumped after him, but at the last moment, a fast zombie grabbed his backpack. He jerked, and the contents spilled down into the courtyard. "Forget it," Jack shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him along. They ran across the rooftops until the rumbling and screams were behind them. But ahead, they could already see a new cloud of smoke and flames. The whole city was burning. Jack stopped, looked back at his partner, and, exhaling, said, "This is just the beginning, and we don't even know what caused this hell."